In this video, I will show you how to make this shoe. In the last video, in the last moccashoe video that I did, I taught you how to make this shoe. And with this shoe, there are gathers up in the toe area because when we made the pattern, we had the overfoot part and the underfoot part, and then we added sides to these two pieces and determined that it was 1 inch side that I needed for these moccashoes because the distance around was 8 inches, 3 inches on both of these pieces, and so that meant 6 inches, and I needed 1 inch here and 1 inch out there to make this edge. So all the extra side, all of the side was added to the underfoot part so that these gathers were the result. In this video, we're going to add 1/2 of an inch to the overfoot part and another 1/2 of an inch to the underfoot part. So that results in having no gathers, because they exactly match each other. And as with the other video, there's just, once you've got this down, how to make this, and you've got your patterns right, you can make an infinite number of different styles, even adding on a top to make boots. So this is, I think, a really important pattern to learn. I will not be repeating most of the directions in this video. You can look at the other one to learn all the details. Now here you see that I've added 1/2 inch all around the underfoot part and 1/2 inch around the upper part. On this moccashoe, I'm making a rounded top line. It's several inches in front of the halfway line. So the halfway line doesn't always have to be utilized to make top lines with. I think you could even go a little lower, square, or a tab across. Just a lot that you can do with this pattern. I have my pattern here, and you can see that I've punched a lot of holes in it. A little over 100 holes that I've punched. So that's pretty much the most labor-intensive part of making these shoes. You don't actually have to punch all these holes out. You can also just put a piece of paper behind your pattern. So just imagine that I didn't have the holes punched out, but instead I had the marks where the stitches go. And then I can just go along and place them right alongside the pattern so that I don't have to actually punch out those holes. Although there's something satisfying about having a pattern that's all complete and that you just need one piece with all the information on it. So using this pattern, I made tiny stitch marks with a micron pen, and you could use a marker or a silver gel pen, and transferred them then to this pattern. I didn't put stitch marks here because I'm going to add a bottom sole here, and then I'll punch stitch holes through both layers. Here I have used the Aqua Lim 315 non-toxic contact cement to cement this natural rubber. It's very textured onto this the sole of this moccashoe. I will make my stitch marks on the leather side. It'll be easier to see where they should go and to punch them out. And I have to make stitch holes down this edge too, so that the sole is completely attached to the shoe. I have now punched holes all around the upper, and on the underfoot part I used a marker inside to mark through the stitch holes on my pattern, since none of that will be visible at all. So the only holes that I have left to punch are these, and I have to use a 0-0 drive punch because the 0-0 hand kind of spring punch that I usually use, always with a piece of leather behind it, so the tube passes all the way through the leather on top, but it's not gonna, well, maybe I can reach in there. But if I did have a problem with reaching, I would have a wooden end cutting board under there, or plastic ones that are sold for that purpose, and then I would just make the holes with it. So I'll be punching these and then be back to stitch. If you would like to have a cord, a strip of leather, or shoelace, something through some holes to make it a little more secure around the top line, you need to punch holes for it. So I'm using a bigger drive punch, 3/16, and we'll punch these holes. Then I will continue. Altogether I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 holes on each side, and that works out to have the cord pass on the outside at the heel. You don't want it on the inside. I'm using the 2-needle running stitch to stitch this seam, the seam that's between the underfoot and overfoot part. So this natural rubber soling, I cut it the same size as the underfoot piece so that I don't have to do any separate stitching. So I'm using the 2-needle running stitch, so that's one that comes up, and then the one that goes down goes into the same hole. And here I usually start from the inside because it's easier to see where the next stitch hole is. And I'll continue with this until I get to this point where I'll start using the whip stitch to stitch the toe area. I finished stitching that seam, and now I'm ready to head to the toe. I took these 2 threads through this last hole one time, and now I decided to do a cross stitch instead of just the whip stitch. Whip stitch is one side of the cross stitch. So I'll be holding this thread out of the way, going through that same hole, and making these X's all around, and I won't expect to see any gathers. So I'll be back after I've done a bit of cross stitching. I've made my cross stitches all the way around the toe area, and I've almost completed the side. Each time that I'm making a new stitch, I start by poking the thread in through the leather. I could have started with the other thread and tried to poke through the natural rubber, but it's very hard to find that hole. So start with going through the leather, and then the leather directly across and down. So come back up, and then I'm ready to use the other thread, and to go through that hole through the rubber, I pull the thread that's already there over to the side so that it leaves a nice hole. Come back up, and I'm ready for the final 5 stitches. I have finished stitching the side seam, made a knot here, ran the thread under a few stitches, and now I'm working on the heel seam with the same cross stitch all the way down here to the bottom. And I have cut away the natural rubber soling from this area here, and I cut off the leather in this area so that this whole base of the heel seam will not be so bulky. And then I'm going to stitch these layers of natural rubber together. I have the little rectangle stitched to the shoe now. With this kind of soling, as I was doing it, I realized it was better to just stitch the pieces together instead of pushing them and stitching them through the upper part of the shoe. And then I stitched across here, put the cord through the little piece of leather strip that I cut, and this little shoe is finished.